We bought new sofas before Christmas, and Gimley has been banned from sitting on them, so I thought it was only fair that I build him somewhere comfy for him to chill out in the evenings. The dog bed was made primarily from oak, with American walnut accents. I had a couple of oak boards sat on the shelf, although as you can see from this shot, the board that I picked had a pretty considerable bulge in it, which needed to be planed off. The board was cut in half and then planed and thicknessed down to give me two decent boards to work with. I've owned a few compound miter saws over the years, but I think this is actually the first time that I've ever cut a compound miter. I decided on an angle of 10 degrees for the side of the dog bed to add a bit of interest and not just be a plain wooden box. Once I'd cut both 10-degree angles on the first piece, I used it as a template to let me cut out the second one to exactly the same size. While the front and back pieces were cut at 10 degrees on the sides, the actual sides of the dog bed were just straight miters. I used a stop block to ensure that both of the sides were exactly the same width. I'm using a domino for the joinery on these miters, but I'm pretty sure that normal glue would be fine for a joint like this. The dog bed itself is going to be fairly stationary and should not get knocked about too much, so a standard glue joint should be plenty strong enough. I marked out and cut an opening on the front panel, both to allow easier access for Gimley and also to show off the cushion that I'm going to be making a little bit later. Now with the panels all cut and ready to go, I could move on to gluing up. I glued all the dominoes and got them inserted, then applied glue to all the faces of the joints. When clamping this together, I used some 10-degree wedges to help give me an even clamping pressure on the joints. Because of the angle on the front and back, it caused the sides to not line up perfectly, so I needed to plane down the sides and the bottom edges to make all of them equal height and all of the top edges flat. Next I could move on to the edging. I cut some thin strips from an offcut of walnut using the thin rip jig that I built last week. I could then go around the top edges and glue on the walnut strips. To begin with, I used a nail gun, but decided against that after the first nail as it looked pretty ugly and I didn't fancy having to go around and glue and fill all the nail holes. So instead I just glued the strips on and used masking tape to apply clamping pressure onto the strips while they dried. While the edging was drying, I moved on to making the cushion. I cut out a piece of MDF to the same dimensions as the foam I had bought, then I marked out and drilled 10 holes in an offset grid pattern. The holes are for attaching buttons, which will be threaded through from the front of the cushion and then pulled tight to give a kind of tufting effect. Once I'd laid the material out on the foam, I quickly realised that 10 buttons was going to be way too many, so instead I went with 4. I used nylon thread and a long needle to attach the buttons to the cushion, and then I pulled the thread tight and secured it with staples. The material was then trimmed and secured to the base with more staples. If there are any upholsterers watching, then I hope you're not cringing too much, but ultimately I'm pretty happy with how this cushion turned out. With the cushion finished, I could remove the masking tape from the edging and get it all trimmed back. I removed the majority of the excess with a block plane and then finished it all off with what seemed like hours of sanding. I wanted to use walnut for the feet to tie in with the accent strip on the top of the dog bed. I needed to add in some supports for the cushion, so it made sense to me to attach the feet to those supports. I quite like how this turned out because the feet are inset from the main body of the dog bed, which in my mind adds a bit of visual interest. The dog bed could then be given a few coats of Danish oil and it was ready to be presented to its new owner. I'm really happy with how this one turned out, and Gimley certainly seems to be a fan as well. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more woodworking projects which may or may not involve Gimley. Thanks for watching.